After more technical difficulties, we're back. So as I said before, when did um, when did you and grandmother like decide that y'all wanted to have kids, and what was the thought process behind that?
Super question, and I know my answer is going to sound a little strange to you, but the first real date that grandmother and I had, we talked everything under the sun. And on the first date, before she had a ring, we talked about marriage, we talked about children and how many, and what her duties would be and what mine would be. And we came to a perfect agreement on what I'd be responsible for and what she would be responsible for. So the answer is on the first date.
So did y'all talk about like, oh, we should have three children, or was that planned, or it just kind of just happened?
Well, son, it was very planned. And to to answer these questions that are not in chronological sequence really would require more time than we have. But we talked all of that on the first date, and it was very premeditated. Uh, Grandmother wanted to be a stay at home mom, but she wanted to work until we were expecting a child. Uh, and I wanted her to be a stay at home mom. I never had any inside duties as a boy. My duties were keep the yard, paint the house, that kind of thing. And my sisters did everything inside. So I did not want to do housework or laundry or dishes. So I wanted to provide income, and she would manage. She'd
Yeah.
be the president of the house. So we started by thinking that probably three children would be a good number. After we had these three wonderful daughters, including your angel mother, we really thought seriously about a larger family, maybe four or five. And after marriage, after three daughters, we talked about it a long time. And finally, we decided okay, we were still in those budget years, young we'd been married long enough to have three daughters, but I was not making big time money and we were on a tight budget. And so we thought, well, if we do everything we want to for these three daughters, if we give them a good standard of living, send them to college, give them a good marriage, that's probably all we can handle. We didn't know God was going to bless us later on in life. And so we made a premeditated decision. Okay, three is all we can care for. And so we were very fortunate. We didn't have surprises. I
Hmm.
mean, we had our children when we wanted to.
So that there were no accidents.
No,
No.
we really
No.
didn't have accidents.
No.
All of them were very premeditated.
Oh, that's great.
Grandmother taught for roughly 5 years before we had Aunt Alice. So we had enough time to build a little financial foundation, get a house, uh, know each other extremely well. And so then we decided, okay,
Because that was going to be my second question: is how long were y'all married until y'all had your first kid? So 5 years.
right at 5 years. It may have been four.
Yeah.
Grandmother was 1 year older than I in school. Not chronologically. I started school late.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't do kindergarten. I started in the first grade. So grandmother finished Baylor before I finished U of H by 1 year. So I think maybe we were married 4 years. But she was terrific. She not only worked those 4 years, but she worked every summer. Grandmother had a terrific job in the summers. She worked for Manpower, who placed her with Frigidaire and other Markle Steel and other big companies. Every company she worked for in the summer offered her a full time job. They asked her, don't go back to school, uh, do a career with us. But because we had agreed she was going to be a stay at home mom, school teaching was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so she taught 4 years, and this is important because we had that premeditated agreement. We never got dependent on her salary. Our budget was based on my salary, so all of her salary, school teaching and summer, either went into investments or it went into purchasing furniture and the equity for our first house, that kind of thing.
So she would have been a teacher in the 50s, the early 50s. Is that right? Or
Well, uh, no, latter 50s.
because what year were y'all married?
Well, she graduated from Baylor in 58.
Oh, okay.
And
So
we,
it was like the 60s almost. Like
well,
early
we were
60s.
married in August of 1959, so
Okay, that makes more
we
sense.
would have been married
Yeah.
then into the 60s.
And how old were y'all when y'all got married? I think you said this last time.
Yeah, I think we were 22.
Okay.
I'd have to think it through, but I believe 22.
Okay. So you guys get married after 4 years of you guys both working, and then you have Aunt Alice. Where were y'all living at the time?
Well, all that's correct. We were living in our first house. By then, we had bought our first home, and it's the only used home we ever bought. It was a nice house in a nice little subdivision, but it was what we could afford. And you're not going to believe this, but you and I have had conversations about inflation and how you really need to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Our first house cost $17,000.
Wow.
And
That's crazy.
our house payment was about $117.
Wow. At the time, did that seem expensive?
Yeah, that was tight because we got, of course, I was at the bank, so we had some savings for the down payment. But I got a bank loan for part of the down payment, repayable in monthly installments, and we assumed the man's loan. Back in those years, that was a popular thing. Uh, we bought from a Jewish man named Zaid, Marvin Zaid, Zeid. He had been in the military, so he had a GI loan. So we paid him for his equity and assumed his GI loan. So we had a 4.5% loan. So we lived in our first house when Aunt Alice was born, and and Aunt Susan was born. Your mother was born in a new house out north, but we perhaps have talked, or we can talk about that if that's one of your questions.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's the answer. We were in our first used house.
How big was this house? How many bedrooms and bath?
Well, it was a nice little house. It had 3 bedrooms, and it had 2 baths, uh, and it had a den and a formal living room.
It was a one-story house?
One story. Yeah, so it was a pretty nice house for
Yeah.
that time. These larger houses came later. Like I think I've said to you, in the rental house where I was reared, there were 7 of us. My grandparents lived with us in their latter years. There were 7 of us in a 1 bathroom house.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a bedroom until my sister was married. Then I got her bedroom. But my mother had a rollaway bed behind the door in the hall, and she had to make that bed at night when it was sleep time because I didn't have a bedroom. So it was a pretty nice house for that day.
Yeah. So you're living in that house, and grandmother gets pregnant. How does that? Is there a story of like how you found out, or was it just like, oh, I'm pregnant?
Well, we wanted it to happen, and so grandmother informed me, and we made some big moves at that time. See, things were a lot stricter in many categories in our young married years. you could not begin teaching a year if you knew you were expecting. And so she resigned quickly. She quit teaching and stayed home. And also, we were so nervous about having a baby. I didn't want her doing any work of any kind that was strenuous. So we got a maid, and we could only afford her one day every 2 weeks. So the maid did the washing and the ironing and things that involved lifting. And
Yeah.
so we were just so nervous about our baby coming.
In those days, how soon would you find out like the gender? Like, would you have to wait until they were born, or could you tell?
Yes, yes, what you've said is correct. Uh, there are a lot of differences in those days. For example, the medical field would not have considered letting a father be in the delivery room.
Oh, really?
When we went into the hospital, grandmother and I were separated. So I went into the dad's club. It was just a little room, air conditioned, it had couches. And with Aunt Alice, uh, I was there most of the night. So I did not know whether she'd be boy or girl
Until you saw her?
until I saw her. And I didn't know how
Wow.
healthy she was, how normal she was. So I was the only one in the dad's club. For a while, there was another young man, but then his baby was delivered first.
Yeah.
So our doctor came rolling her in this cart that looked like a laundry cart. And she was way down in the bottom of it. And I was stretched out on the couch. I wasn't asleep, but I had my feet off the end so I wouldn't get dirt on the couch. And he came rolling her in, and he said, "Mr. Saunders, would you like to see your baby girl?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I jumped up and I looked down in that cart. She was way in the bottom, and she was mad. I guess she was hungry. Her face was red, and she was screaming and waving her arms, and she had this massive black hair, and it went away. She didn't
Yeah.
have black hair later, so that's when I saw my first baby.
Wow. So that's how you found out? The doctor
Yeah,
just said you want to.
yeah. You want to see your baby girl?
Were you Did you have a preference of like of what gender, or like were you just content with whatever?
Well, I would have been happy either way.
No.
But once I had a girl, I really became a girl fan.
Yeah.
I really wanted all girls.
Oh, really?
Some of my friends, when say ultimately your mom was born, well, some of my friends would say, "Oh, sorry you didn't get your boy," and I said, "Listen, I got what I wanted. I love three girls."
Yeah.
Now, once I started having grandsons, that was a new deal. I loved having grandsons,
Yeah.
uh, but I was a girl's daddy.
Yeah. That's
Girls are
interesting.
so easy,
Really?
so easy.
That's interesting. I would think it would be the opposite, but I guess every father has their preference.
Well, our girls were obedient. A lot of the more intimate things were handled by their grandmother, by their mother, your grandmother, their
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah.
So a daddy of girls gets the fun part. Uh, they would come to me when they were unhappy with grandmother, and they'd
Yeah.
tell me all their troubles, and I would try to soothe them, and we would go out on dates before father-daughter dating was
Yeah.
popular. We didn't call it a date, but we used to go out together. We'd go to the movies, and we'd go all kinds of
Yeah.
things. Your mother and I would go to the swimming pool. She would ride in the little basket of my bicycle. So I love being the father of girls.
Yeah. So you have Aunt Alice, and then how many years until you have Aunt Susan? Like what's the age difference there?
Well, they were pretty close. We were still in that same house. Aunt Alice and Aunt Susan were born in that first house on Kingfisher Street. And when Aunt Alice was still quite a little baby, no, I'm sorry, when Aunt Susan was still quite a little baby, we decided, well, we'd really like to have a new house and a better house, and Lord was beginning to slowly bless us, and we were getting a little more financial stability.
Do you remember the years that Aunt Alice and Aunt Susan were born?
Uh,
At least like a
well,
close as you can get.
everybody's going to be unhappy with me. I have on my desk a month chart that shows everybody's birthday and anniversary and
Yeah.
when they were saved and when they were baptized, and I'm just not smart enough to capture it all. So, and Alice was roughly 4 years after marriage. Then Aunt Susan was roughly 2 years later. So they were pretty close
So
in
like
age.
64 and 66 or something like
Well,
that.
I won't quote the years because I'll just get more embarrassed.
Yeah. And so then after you have Aunt Susan, isn't there a larger gap between Aunt Susan and my mom?
Yes, quite a gap. We had built a new house out north in Spring, Texas. Great community, Ponderosa Forest. They told us a brand new elementary school was going to be built just around the corner from us. So our girls lived parts of 2 blocks away from their elementary school. They could walk to school, they could ride their bike, and we didn't worry so much about our children in those years. So we would just let them walk to school or ride their bikes.
Yeah.
So your mama was born out there, and I remember the day she was born so well. Aunt Alice and Aunt Susan were still fairly young children, and so our plan was when we went to have your mother, my mother and daddy, your great grandparents, Saunders, would come and keep them until our new baby arrived and they did their days in the hospital and all that routine. So I called my daddy. Well, I'll say it quickly. Fun morning. Our bedroom was upstairs. So we come down and grandmother had breakfast for me and I had a big breakfast. Eggs, bacon, the whole deal. And I was largely dressed for work. Of course, bankers wore coats and ties, and so I was dressed for work. And so grandmother just calmly says to me, Roy, we need to go to the hospital this morning. And so, I got all nervous immediately. We've been eating breakfast and fiddling and diddling, and you need to go to the hospital. And so she said, yes, we're fine. So I called my daddy, said, come over here as quick as you can. We got to go. And so we had to leave Aunt Alice and Aunt Susan by themselves till my mother and daddy could get there. So we gave them a key to the house to let their grandparents in, and they were funny. They were little characters. So when we pulled away, my last memory is I'm looking back at the door, and I see Aunt Alice's head here, and then Aunt Susan was a little shorter, and I saw her whole body here. So I just saw two little heads peeping out the door. And we'd given them a key, and we said, put it in a safe place. So they talked about it, and they decided the safest place they could think of was in the refrigerator. So they put the key in the refrigerator when we went to have your mama. And time was getting a little short. Grandmother already had 2 babies, so she was lying on the back seat, and I was driving. So she would periodically ask me, Roy, where are we now? And I'd say, well, we're on Main Street. We're crossing a certain street. And she'd say, how long are we from the medical center? And I'd say, well, I'm guessing about 20 minutes. And so I would keep her informed on the back seat. And I was getting more and more nervous because I knew the time must be getting short. Of course, she wanted to know how many minutes. And so your mama came fairly quickly after we got there.
Well, that's great. So after you had like all the kids and stuff, how was the dynamic in the house like? Because my mom was so much younger, like was there like an obvious age difference like between all your children? Like,
Well, there was an age difference, son, but it worked out beautifully. And I can't tell you what fantastic years those were. All three girls were very, very manageable children. None of them were disobedient or caused problems. And so, of course, Aunt Alice was the oldest by some years. And she had her life in music and school. And then Aunt Susan had her life, and she and I were in a group called Indian Princess. So she and I would go to I had something different with every child. And and your mother was a pure delight, being my baby. And we had many interests together. We, of course, in later life, she went to private school, and I would take her in the morning and pick her up in the evening, and so we had at least 1 hour each way to talk and get to know each other. So it was just pure delight. Your
yeah.
grandmother was an angel, and she took total charge of the house and the girls, and she did so many things. I would always call her when I was leaving the bank because I couldn't always leave at the same time. If I had important things going on, it might be later at night. And so she knew she had an hour to get supper ready. And she would do a thing with your mama and her sisters. She would dress them up. They would be in Sunday clothes, not every day, but special treat. They'd be all dressed up and hair fixed, and she would let them sit on the curb at the. We lived one house from the corner, so she would let them sit on the curb. So when I turned the corner coming into our street, suddenly there were these three little angels sitting on the curb waiting for their daddy. Now, every time I saw them, my heart would do a flip. And, and even though we'd done it before, I always was shocked and surprised. And I would screech the brakes, and they'd come running, and I'd open the back door, and they'd jump in the middle of the car, middle seats, and we would just drive a short distance to the corner because they were on the curb and turn right to our house, and were the second house. But they would ride with me for two houses, and then we would all go.
Well, that's fun.
And one of the things I've always been so appreciative of grandmother about 1,000 things, but one is she always made me look good to my daughters. And that was so important to me. She would tell my girls, your daddy's a good man. Your daddy loves you. Your daddy's a Christian. Your daddy provides for you. So she might get unhappy with me. Grandmother might be unhappy with me because I was not always a perfect man.
Yeah.
And I wanted things my way. But she never expressed that to my girls. She was always complimentary,
That's great.
and and that helped a great deal with my relationship with them. She would not tell them their daddy's faults.
Well, that's great. So, when they were young, I would say like before a teenager, or even when they were teenagers, so before they were adults, how would you characterize like each of their personalities? Like, how are they different? Like, what was the difference in personality between the
Okay.
three?
Well, there were many likenesses, son, but there were differences. The likenesses were that they were just little dream girls. They were all three. They they were just a delight to their daddy. But their differences, though, they all had distinct personalities. I mean, Aunt Alice was the first, and so she was a hard charger, good student. Uh, then Aunt Susan had her unique personality, and it it's not always easy to have a hard charging older sibling. So she was a good student, but she really started making straight A's when she was in Baylor. She was not as interested in school as Aunt Alice was.
Yeah.
And she was fun, and she was into friends and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Then your mother was just unique beyond description. She was just a fabulous baby and girl. Uh, and but being younger, uh, she had different interests. Different. She had totally different friends. She had unique friends, and the two older girls were more in the years when we were on tight budget. I mean, we were no different than other young couples. We had a budget and man, we watched every nickel. But by the time your mom came, God had begun to bless us, and I was vice president of the bank by then, and so in a financial sense, your mother had a better life, and it was sort of a joke in the family when when I bought the first new Honda Accord for your mother. Her older sister told me, they said, we knew it. When we were at Baylor, we had to share a used uh, automobile, station wagon, family station wagon. We shared our freshman year, and the baby gets a brand new sparkling Honda Accord. So it was sort of funny. And even at Baylor, they said, we knew it. We had to have uh, lower cost apartments, but the baby got to live in a brand new fancy apartment. So it was always funny.
Yeah.
And they had this little deal. When they were, grandmother had the idea, but when they were all the same age, and Alice was a certain age, I don't remember what, 3 or 4, we had her portrait taken at Giddings Studio, which was a high class, pricey. And then Aunt Susan had hers at the same age, and your mama had hers at the same age. And if you haven't seen them, I ought to show them to you in our bedroom. I will sometime. But we had these 3 paintings grouped, and at first we didn't think much about it. We just wanted a little configuration. So we put Aunt Alice at the top, and then Aunt Susan and your mom was a little bit below,
Yeah.
making sort of a circle. Well, every now and then we would notice the pictures had been rearranged. Your mother was on top, and Alice was on the bottom. And we would always laugh about that. If we changed them, suddenly one day your mama would be on the top again. So that was another family joke
Yeah, that is
about their differences. So that's some of the similarities and some of the differences. They, in certain ways, they looked alike. They looked like sisters,
funny. Yeah.
but they had their totally different personalities. And Alice wanted music. Uh, your Aunt Susan became a good scholar, and she was headed toward being with me in the banks. She worked with me every summer. And your mama was just a free spirit. She loved to have fun. She loved to do everything. She
Yeah.
loved to sing and dance and go to parties and eat out, and she loved travel.
Yeah.
She was a fun baby.
So like from the way that my mom talks about herself as a child, she always like it seems like she's like a troublemaker or she was always getting into trouble. Um, did you experience that she was the more like rebellious child out of the 3 or
Well, she probably thought about that more than we did, because I hear my friends talk about problems with their children. I really don't remember any problems with any of the 3. Now, we had some medical issues, and that's one of the reasons you and I had our little conversation. So uh, they had growing pains and medical issues, and we really tried to be serious about that. They all 3 went to orthodontics, through orthodontics, and when the guy saw he'd handle all my children, he took a look at grandmother and he said, Miss Saunders, you need to have braces. So that was another family story. I had a grown woman with braces on her teeth.
Really? How old was she when she got braces?
Oh, she had been a mama of three, and they had all three been through it.
So she was like mid-30s or something?
Oh, I don't remember exactly, but she was mature.
Yeah. That's funny.
But
So,
I don't remember any troublemakers, son.
yeah.
Your mom, sort of like a subject you and I were on earlier, she probably thought about that a lot more than we did.
Yeah.
She was wonderful. She was just a dreamboat. And even her trouble was funny and a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like one time she burned a couch. She had a grandmother was always buying dresses and dolls and things for her little girl things. So she had an iron that would get hot. And her bedroom was upstairs in that house. And she left her iron on the couch and it burned a hole in the couch.
Wow.
Well, I was out working in the yard. Grandmother was yelling out that window, Roy, come up here, come up here. And so your mama felt that was a great trouble for us. But once we realized she was all right, we just thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Just a child growing.
That's great. So there's not like a story of like a time one of them got in big trouble. Like, what would you say what was the biggest trouble one of your kids got in that you were like pretty mad or it was like a big deal? Like,
Well, there was a little saying in those days. Every generation has funny little sayings, and we would call a child a goody goody two shoes.
yeah.
She sat on the front row and she was a teacher's pet. Well, that was Aunt Alice. She was goody two shoes. But oddly enough, she was the one that a couple of times got in the most trouble because one time she and Aunt Susan and some friends were playing
Croquet?
croquet. Is that the way you
Yeah.
pronounce it? Okay,
Yeah.
in the backyard. And we had your mama's bassinet right by the window. So Aunt Alice starts swinging that stick and lets it fly, and it flies into the window of the back of the house. The window broke, and some glass got in to your mama's crib.
Ooh.
So Aunt Alice was frantic. She came running in the back door just crying and bawling and said, I hurt the baby, I hurt the baby, I hurt the baby. Well, fortunately, she didn't.
Yeah.
The glass was in the crib, but we got it out and got your mom out, and she was not hurting anyway. But Aunt Alice was just frantic, and we were not unhappy with her, but she was unhappy with herself.
Yeah.
And then the one time we were unhappy with her, all three of our girls took lessons of many kinds, instrumental, and they all took piano lessons. And for a young family, young couple, that was a bit of a sacrifice for us because in the starting years we didn't have an overabundance of money. So piano lessons, and even that piano which you saw back in our sunroom, in its day it was a very expensive piano. I bought it from one of my customers who owned a piano business, but it was expensive. So they had to practice, and we had discipline. When they took piano lessons, they had to practice. So, and Alice was really good about that. She always practiced right on schedule. But one day she just made up her little mind. She didn't want to practice. And so she and I sort of got at it with each other. And she was saying, Daddy, I don't want to practice. And I was saying, well, baby, you're going to practice. I'm paying for piano lessons and an expensive piano, and you're going to practice. So she got sort of huffy, and she was sitting on the piano stool. And she said, I wish this piano would burn up. And boy, that didn't sit well with me because typically she was my goody two-shoes girls. Mrs. Goody Goody, And so she and I had words with her, or I had words with her about wanting
Yeah.
the piano to burn up. But in the main, they were fantastic, and we didn't have trouble with them.
Well, that's great. That's great that you didn't have to punish them a lot or anything. So, is there anything else you want to say about the early years of you being a parent for them
Well, I'll say
before we
this,
move on?
this just different. Quickly, in summary, you and I have talked about how all my grandchildren are different. They're wonderful, and one likes this and one likes that. Well, your mom and her sisters were that way. Uh, and so, in many ways, they were different. And Alice was the goody two shoes. We had very little trouble with her. She was the oldest, hard charging. Uh, Aunt Susan sometimes would want things a different way. And your mom had an entirely different approach to life. So we had to deal with them. What I'm trying to say is they were their own person.
Yeah.
They had their own personalities. Aunt Susan didn't try to be Alice, and your mom didn't try to be Alice or Susan. She was Kathleen. And I tried to teach them that. It's like, you be Benjamin,
Yeah.
let Margaret be Margaret. I'd say, Kathleen, baby, you be Kathleen, and you let your sister Alice be Alice. So they were not only different in personality, in school, in approach to life, but even in Christianity. Uh, Maybe I've said this to you, but grandmother and I really were a little nervous about talking to them about being Christians because they were so obedient girls that if we said to your mama, would you like to say the prayer? She would do it just to please us. So we really walked gently there, and we were so happy that each of the three came to Christ in a different way. And they're all three deep Christians, but they're uniquely so. Your mama is a different, unique. Now they all have the fundamentals, but your mama is a distinct approach, and Aunt Susan is a different one, and Alice she's more of a hustle bustle, have 19 ministries,
Yeah.
many things going, and your mom and Aunt Susan are a bit more methodical. So that concludes sort of their likenesses and their
Yeah.
differences.
Before we move on from your children, how did you come up with names for each of them? Like, where did the names come from and stuff?
Well, fun question. Alice, your Aunt Alice, was more of a family name. Your grandmother is Margaret Alice. So Alice is her middle name.
Oh, really?
I had an Aunt Alice that I was very fond of. She was a deep Christian woman, but she was Methodist, and so we always teased her about that.
Yeah.
Why in the world are you a Methodist? So, uh, well, I guess that's enough said on her.
What's her middle name?
Her name, your Aunt Alice, is Alice Lee, and so Lee was a family name. We had various relatives whose name was Lee, either last name, middle name, first name.
Yeah.
And then Susan was just more of a sweet name. We wanted our first of all, we wanted them to have feminine names. They were girls.
Yeah.
And we wanted their name, just like Benjamin is a man's name. I never met a girl named Benjamin.
Yeah.
So that's Aunt Alice, and Aunt Susan was just a very feminine, sweet name. And in many ways, that's your mother. Uh, Kathleen was just a name we really liked. There was a song, so I don't know, Irish, Scottish, something. You may have heard it. The song was a little sad, but it was so sweet. It said, I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen. And it was a sweet song that we just loved. So we just liked the name.
Yeah.
Your mama was not a family name. Now, I know all her buddies call her Cat, and we think that's real cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun, and we're happy with it. But we don't call her that.
Yeah.
She is Kathleen. You are Benjamin. Uh, Elizabeth is Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Samuel is Samuel. We don't. We just don't call any of our children nicknames.
Yeah. Well, I think that's cool. Like your family can call you by your your government name, but then you kind of also have your your
Sure.
cool name. Like,
Well, that's
like
right.
most of my friends call me Ben, but I think it's cool that you guys and my mom and dad they call me Benjamin. Like because I don't know. I think the full name is more for like family, and then nicknames
Yes.
are more for friends.
Well, and we're happy with that. And we're very comfortable with what everybody is called, depending on what business you're in.
Yeah.
You may, on your business card, be Benjamin Land. Uh, I think that's a very distinguished name. Benjamin is a prestigious Bible name. I think Land is a great name. It it's easy to remember. It sticks in your brain.
Yeah.
And I know your daddy takes a different approach. I think Charles Barton Land the Third is a fantastic name. That would look so good on a business card.
Yeah.
But your dad is a fun man. He like you has personality and he likes people. And Chuck is a great name for him.
Yeah.
And we do. He's sort of the exception.
Well, because his dad had the same name, so you
Yeah.
kind of have to call him something.
I think your daddy is the only one we call by a name other. Well, I called him Chuck.
Yeah.
Uh,
It'd be kind of weird to call him Charles. I feel like.
and I think he's the only one. All the others we call by their Christian name.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, if you well, actually, before I ask that question, what was the process of naming them? Like, did you and grandmother just talk about it, or was it mostly like grandmother was like, "Oh, I want them to," or like, how was that?
It was a joint decision. We did talk a lot about it. We talked with each other. We also talked with your grandparents on both sides. We asked what are some family names. We didn't want to be it didn't want the name to be too dated.
Yeah.
There are certain names that sort of date you to a time frame.
Yeah.
But we like there were other names we liked. We really liked the name Victoria. We easily could have named a girl Victoria. And also we liked your great great grandfather and your great uncle. They were named Milton. We liked the name Milton, and if we had had a boy, we very likely would have named him Milton. And again, referring to your daddy, we like the name Charles, and we were really happy that Samuel's baby is Charles. And there may be some relationship there to your daddy because Samuel and his brothers are very fond of your daddy.
Yeah.
Uh, Kyle is very fond of your daddy. He's not a blood relative, but he's married in.
Yeah.
So all these boys are very fond of your daddy. And so we were really happy with the name Charles for this baby.
Yeah, because that was gonna be my second. That was gonna be my follow up question. Is if you were gonna have a boy, what would the name be? So it would be Milton, or did you have other ideas too?
Well, I think Charles, Milton, we really didn't have family names for a man that we wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
Now, and Susan was very sweet and used Saunders as Caleb's middle name. He is Caleb Saunders Starr. We really were so happy with your mother when she named your Margaret Margaret. We just loved that. Everybody has biblical names, but we always tell our friends, your mother was the smartest of all. All three girls named a bunch of children biblical names, but your mother was the smartest. She named her baby Margaret, and many benefits accrued to that.
Yeah.
So uh, my names were fine. I don't have a problem with it, but they're country names.
Yeah.
And they are period names. My best buddy was Roy, and I was Roy, and my grandfather was Roy Saunders. And so I got names from both grandfathers. So we really didn't want to use ours.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah used Roy as the baby's middle name, Judah Roy Rivette. And Roy Rivette sort of rings.
Yeah.
But those are basically the names we liked. We liked distinguished names. Uh, Benjamin, Charles, and there were a bunch of biblical names we would have liked.
Yeah.
We liked Isaiah, and we liked your cousins' names. We liked Benjamin, Samuel, Caleb, Micah. We liked Benjamin, but liked biblical names.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think we'll move on from the children and just briefly, we'll begin to start about your career because we already talked about the beginning stages, like when you were in college and when you were in the Navy.
Yeah.
But like when you were having Aunt Alice, what was your position? When grandmother had Aunt Alice, what was your position at the bank?
Okay, I do remember that very well. I have files on all of you, and when God takes Granddaddy, I want you to be each of you to be sure you get your files because your files have all kinds of interesting things. They have pictures of you. They have notes I've written you and notes you've written me. Just all kinds of things that are personal. So when Aunt Alice was born, I remember her birth certificate very, very well because maybe they still do, but birth certificates in that day had your father's name and his occupation. And so Aunt Alice's has my name. And at that point in life, everybody still called me Roy Joe. Later on, when I had to sign stock certificates for the bank, all that lengthy name just wore me out. Every year I had to sign 500 bank stock certificates for the bank, so I became Roy.
Yeah.
But it has my full name, Roy Joe Saunders, Assistant Credit Manager. In your career, the most delightful thing that could happen to you was get in the credit department. Then you wanted to be Assistant Credit Manager, then Credit Manager. Then you were promoted to being a loan officer.
Yeah.
And you were Assistant Vice President and on up the ladder. But I was Assistant Credit Manager.
And what were like your responsibilities
Well,
for that job?
I aspired to be credit manager. So I was the number 2 man in a large credit department. So I supervised employees. I analyzed financial statements, did analytical work of a financial nature, and I did inquiry work. If we had a customer who banked with other banks, I would call them and see their experience. And I would call trade suppliers and anyone who did business with a customer. I developed the file on them,
Yeah.
making sure they were credit worthy, and I would write opinions of whether their line of credit could be increased or whether really too much. They really were not good for that amount. So those are my larger jobs.
So you were assistant credit manager, and then how long until you became credit manager after that?
Yes.
How long did
yes.
that take?
Well, I think we've gone through this in an earlier podcast, but there was a uniqueness in my getting into the credit department. They wanted me there now, and I needed to finish college, so I did summer work and really graduated at midterm. So I went in almost instantly as assistant credit manager. That was the game plan for the bank. And my boss, who was credit manager, wanted me to develop fast because he wanted out of there. He wanted to be a loan officer. And that was the management of the bank. They all had credit background, lending background. So his name was Guy Barba, B-A-R-B-A, great friend and a good mentor. So Mr. Barber wanted out of there as quickly as he could. So he just heaped responsibilities on me. Uh, and so it wasn't very long. Uh, he was promoted out, and I was made credit manager early on. Uh, I, so it took a while, but it was faster than typical.
Yeah. So when you were credit manager, how old do you think you were?
Okay, so we know from her birth certificate I was assistant when Aunt Alice was born. So if I were 22 when we married and about 27 when Aunt Alice was born, I was in my late 20s. I mean, you know, that's another joke. Uh, when we talk about uh, success in business, and I would tease, yeah, I was an instant success. It only took me 25 years to be a bank president. So I was made a success overnight, 25 years.
So when you were like promoted to credit manager, how did that happen? Like it was just you already knew it was gonna happen. It was just like it was a process that just
Well, I knew if I performed, I mean, it wasn't automatic. I
yeah
had to rise to the occasion. But success in business is mainly not overnight. It's every year. Make a
yeah
little progress in your knowledge, in your school. And I went to school all those years. You know, I have, you see them on the wall over there, but I have 2 actual degrees and about 5 certificates. And of course, as a young banker, we needed more money, so I actually taught school at night. I taught school 2 nights a week,
interesting.
and you can't believe this. When I got those jobs, grandmother and I were dancing and singing because for a semester I got paid $600. So if I taught at night, we got $1,200. And in today's world, you think, my goodness, that's not even ice cream money.
Yeah
That's not movie money. But if you remember, as a starting banker, I made $300 a month, $3,600 a year. So to make $1,200 at night, that was a third of my annual salary. So we jumped to $4,800 a year,
yeah.
which which was not fabulous, but it was a good livelihood. We saved money and invested, and our girls had a good life. But sometimes that Alice says that she was a young woman when God really started giving us some financial
Yeah.
stability.
So like when you were credit manager, like how did you like did you think like was your goal to become the president of the bank or like what was your like goals when you were credit manager in your career?
Well, that's interesting, and I could talk at great length, but to make it short, the bank was independent. It was Houston National was one of the biggest banks in Houston, and if not the oldest, one of the very, very oldest. So the game plan was the chairman of the board was a Jewish man, and he was a big shareholder, and he represented an investor group out of Shreveport, Louisiana. And of course, later in life, my biggest financial reward was I put investment groups together to buy banks. It wasn't my money. I got a carried interest for doing the deal and turning the bank around.
Yeah.
So Mr. Irvin Slinker, fabulous man, I loved him. He was chairman of the board. his son was a couple of years younger than I, Sidney Slinker. So when his son graduated from college, he brought his son in. And so I was not unhappy about it because I was a realist. I knew the deal. Although I had been with the bank about 6 years, I knew Sidney would rise above me. So he was made a loan officer before I was. He went around me. He jumped over me
Yeah.
because his daddy was the boss.
Were you upset about that? Because it's
No,
kind of
not
like
really.
nepotism?
Because I knew it was going to be that way.
Yeah.
And also, a wonderful attorney who became my great friend, Gus Block, married the chairman of the board's daughter. So I knew both of those men would rise to ranks above me
Yeah.
because they were blood family. And so it was our plan that Gus Block, who became senior partner in a prestigious law firm, your daddies always say, you knew Mr. Westheimer. Well, I did. The firm was Hirsch, Westheimer, and Block. So Mr. Westheimer was a friend of mine and the senior partner. So Gus Block was made a partner early in life because he had all those bank connections. So that firm did all the bank business, and it was to their advantage to promote the chairman of the board's son-in-law. So our long-range plan was, after all those men retired and died, Gus would be chairman of the board. Gus Block would be chairman of the board of the bank.
That's the son?
That's the son-in-law.
Oh, son. Okay.
But not active in the bank.
Yeah.
He would be chairman of the board, but it would be a prestigious thing. He'd come to the monthly board meetings.
Yeah.
The chairman's son, Sidney Slinker, would be the president. And he really wouldn't be very interested in the bank. He would have the title, and he'd come and go. He'd have an office in the bank. And he was a wealthy man, had inheritance, and so he would just have fun. But I would be the executive vice president and CEO, chief executive officer, and I would really run the bank. So our plan was, in all those years, the three young men who were great friends, we loved being together, and we looked forward to the future. Gus would be very prestigious, chairman of the board, but not work very hard. Sidney would be prestigious, president, have an office, meet his friends for lunch, but not work very hard. But I would work hard. I would be the workhorse, and I would be called chief executive officer. I would have the final say in all decisions, but I'd be called executive vice president.
So, so you were kind of like almost groomed for that position? Like it was like kind of known that like you would...
Well, that's exactly right. We all three were groomed in those categories.
Yeah.
But it didn't work out that way, and maybe you want me to tell about that, or maybe you don't. But life didn't work out that way for a bunch of reasons. Do you want me to talk that a little bit?
Yeah.
Quickly?
Yeah.
Well, Gus didn't work out.
And so Gus is the...
Yeah, Gus Block was going to be chairman of the board.
So he's the...
He's the lawyer.
Okay, yeah.
That didn't work out because he and the chairman of the board's daughter got divorced. They had children, but they got divorced.
Yeah.
So he was out of favor. He fell from grace. He was a divorced son-in-law, father of grandsons, but not married to the daughter. So that was out. Sidney Slinker, the son, was just a fun guy. And he later in life was fabulously successful, but he wanted to do fun things. Although I just love banking, it was a 12-hour-a-day job. I got to the bank at 7 in the morning. I basically left at 7 at night. It was a working job, and he didn't like that.
Yeah.
So he quit the bank. And I think I told you in a prior, I inherited all his accounts as a young loan officer.
Yeah.
I inherited all of his accounts, but he wanted to have fun. So he started a business called Pace Management, and it managed Astroworld. He was the executive vice
Oh, really?
president of Astroworld, and they had they promoted shows. They had clients like today. You know who Taylor Swift is.
Yeah.
Well, he had clients like Taylor Swift. He had movie stars who used him as their manager, and he put on the monster truck shows, and he put on plays and movie. He owned a movie theater that I
Really?
financed at Heights Bank. So he was highly successful, but he didn't want that drudgery,
Yeah.
working at a desk day after day. He wanted to have free boot and
Yeah.
travel. And so it didn't work out. Also, it didn't work out because after I was at the bank about 23 years, the investment group started needing money. Uh, they'd had their money tied up all those years and they'd had gotten good dividends, but some of them started wanting their money. And Mr. Slinker wanted to retire. He was getting old and he was wealthy. He didn't need more money. So everybody wanted their money. So the bank merged with Republic National Bank of Dallas and got in that system, and they got their money out of the investment. So I learned a lesson. That investment group was very patient. Over probably 20, they had their money tied up 25 years. So I told my group I would try my best to be on a 5-year program. I would buy banks in their behalf on a 5-year program. The bank was in trouble, and I'd try to turn it around and sell it in 5 years. And mostly I did that. Mostly the banks were on 5-year programs. The, the last group I had was a big group. You know, I had 15 country banks, and it was much more complicated. So we took closer to 10 years. So I learned a very valuable lesson. You cannot take 25 years because your investors get in trouble and they need their money back.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the game plan in that bank. And I left them after 23 years. I did not go with Republic. All their senior management was going to be in Dallas. They were very fair to me. Uh, and even after I left the bank, they offered the presidency of one of the big banks to me, and I turned them down. I did not want to go to Dallas. I was a Houston boy.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So you were the credit manager, and then what was the next position after that?
All right. The, it sounds funny, but the next title up the bank was assistant cashier. The cashier was the head of everything in the bank operational, all technology, tellers, accountants, backroom, data processors. So your first officer level was assistant cashier. So I was made credit manager and assistant cashier. Then when I became a loan officer, you only had one cashier, so I jumped over that title. I went from assistant cashier to assistant vice president. And then the next would be vice president, and then senior vice president. And I was a vice president when your mama was born.
So what's the difference of vice president and senior vice president?
Well, basically, prestige and authority. Assistant vice presidents had a certain loan authority. I could loan a certain amount of money without asking anybody. But then when I was promoted to vice president, my loan authority went up. And this is sort of a funny deal, but my initial loan authority as assistant vice president was about $5,000, which today is nothing. I mean, you can't even make a car loan for that. Then ultimately, in the old days as a vice president, I went from 5,000 to 25,000. And this is the funny part of it. As CEO of those country banks, on my own signature, I could loan 18 million. I could loan the legal authority of the bank just on my signature. So I went from 5,000 to 18 million.
That's crazy. So when you would get these promotions, how would that happen? They would just like, would you already know it was coming, or would they just sit you down and be like, you're gonna like how would that go down? Being
Well,
promoted?
you pretty much talked it out, and they would say to me, Roy, you're doing well as credit manager, and we want you on the loan platform. But one or two things has got to happen though. Either the bank has got to grow more, and we have more business, and we need another loan officer, or one of the senior men needs to retire. So, uh, to try to make it short, I, I skipped a couple of steps,
Yeah.
but
Can I stop you for a second? Is there any way we can pause and I use the restroom?
by all means.
All right, we will be right back.
All right.
And we're back.
Okay. Well, son, it doesn't sound like I'm trying to be brief. It sounds like I'm taking all night. But to try to be brief, I missed some steps in the bank to be technically right and quick. Houston National was Houston National for 10 years. Then it merged with a little bank called Tennessee Bank and Trust, which was owned by a giant New York Stock Exchange company called Tenneco. So we were there another roughly 13 years. They stayed in Houston though, so I could stay because the merged bank stayed in Houston. It moved from our 200 Main location into the magnificent Tenneco building. So actually, I remember your question now, I was made a loan officer after we moved into the Tenneco building, which is sort of an interesting story as you think about careers. One principle is very few folks were overnight successes. You just had to keep working year after year. You made a little progress every year, and then in the final years, God speeded up his blessings. But when we moved into the Tenneco building, I was still credit manager. And the old gentleman who became president called me in one day. And he was stern. I mean, everybody was scared to death of him. Dick Freeman, he was a recovering alcoholic. And I mean, if you got on his bad side, he would eat you alive. So just being called to his office made you nervous. So he said, Saunders, you're probably the best credit man I've got in this bank. But he said, I've got a problem with you. He said, you're too serious. He said, if I see you in the hall, you're walking fast, and you have a frown on your face. He said, I'm not sure you could build business. So I knew, boy, I had to come back with a reply. And I said, Mr. Freeman, I don't disagree with anything you've said. And I said, I'm serious because I'm running a big department that makes big decisions for this bank. And so you're right, sir. I am very serious. But I said, I can build business. And I told him forthrightly, I said, I won't be drinking with customers at night, and I won't be going on vacations with them. I said, I won't be playing golf with them. I said, I will build a following just based on service. I will know their company, and I'll be the best banker they ever had. And I said, you just give me a chance, and you'll see if I do. So he bought that. He said, okay, I'm going with you. Next month, I'm making your assistant the credit manager, and you go down on the loan platform. So I went downstairs to my new desk office, and I did not have one loan. I was a loan officer, but I didn't have any loans.
Yeah.
So I had to go get them. Fortunately, I did inherit all of Sidney Slinker's troubled loans, and we've gone through that together. And many of those became really good customers over time because I was patient with them. So that was sort of the progression, son, of getting to be a loan officer.
So like loan officer, is that just below like president or like vice president or whatever, or like that's the next step after that?
Yes, I was an assistant vice president when I became a loan officer.
Okay. So is there one assistant vice president or is there multiple?
No, you have multiple. The bank had lots of employees and officers, and sort of like the military. Employees are sort of commoners, and officers are the elite.
Yeah.
We had a private dining room that employees couldn't go in and that kind of thing.
So like, what makes you an officer? Like, you have to be is a credit manager? Is that an officer technically?
Yes. The board of directors elects you. The senior management of the bank would recommend to the board that we promote this young man. And they'd plead their case, they'd tell his good features and how long he'd been with the bank and all his pluses. And in almost every case, the board would follow that recommendation. And it was a legal procedure. You were elected, and you then had that title, and you had it for life unless some ill deed made them strip it away from you.
Yeah. So, how many people were on the board?
Well, in those days, by law, you could not have over 25. And so most big banks wanted every position filled because you made a wealthy man a board member. You not only locked in his business, but he then could solicit all his friends, church members, social acquaintances, and say, I'm a board member at Houston National, come bank with us.
So if you're on the board, you have like another job, and then like is being on the board like a paid position? Like, how does that work?
Well, it is, yes, it is a compensated position, but it's more prestige. If a businessman, say a lawyer, if a lawyer could put on his resume and his business card, Director, Houston National Bank, that's very, very prestigious.
Yeah.
Because all the business world knows you've got to be successful, you got to have brain power, you got to have prestige. If you're on if you're on the board of a big bank, so partly it was prestige, but board members were paid a fee. They only came to the bank for duties for a board meeting one time a month, and they might last 2 or 3 hours, and you got a cash payment. So if you didn't want to, you didn't have to admit it on your tax return. You didn't have to tell your wife you had that cash. And it was so funny. Those multimillionaires loved that payment in cash. To start with, it was $100, and that was a lot of money.
You just get $100 bill
Yeah, a crisp, new, unused, uncirculated.
for each meeting,
Each meeting.
and each meeting was like once a month, or
Yeah, so they got, well, for sure they got $1,200 a year. But if you were on a committee, not only a board member, if you were on, say, the audit committee or the business development committee, you got $100 every time that committee met. And so you could, if you were very, very active, you could make $300 a month,
yeah,
which was fantastic as a little side income because they all owned their own businesses and ran their own business.
So none of the board members like worked at the bank. It was all like just random people who were like businessmen, like in the community.
Well, the only ones who were on the board would be like the chairman of the board and the president. So
Because the president's on the board technically?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I had those country banks, in addition to my normal salary as president, I got a payment for every board meeting in cash, in every committee meeting. So I was on every committee. So I got a nice monthly income over and above normal bank compensation.
So is the first time that you were like in a board meeting, is that when you were president? Or like had you ever been like have you ever like been in the room when you were like a lower position?
No, no, you don't go. Those meetings are very prestigious and secret and confidential,
Yeah.
and nobody talks about what happened there. And one employee trusted secretary attends that meeting because she took notes of the meeting. You didn't have dictaphones in those days, so she took it in shorthand
Yeah.
and then would type it up, and it would be the meetings of the board which only a member could read or bank examiners. You were required by the bank examiners, either controller of the currency or the state banking commissioner or the Federal Reserve System, to have minutes of the board meetings. So you, I only got my first board meeting, which I conducted, was as president of Heights State Bank. An older gentleman was chairman of the board. Later, I was president and chairman of the board. But in the beginning, he had no duties in the bank, but he was just a wealthy, large shareholder.
So what's like kind of the difference between chairman and president? Like, is one over the other, or is it kind of like more equal? Or
Well, it's a hard question to answer because, in the sense of authority and responsibility, the president, who is also the chief executive officer, is the senior man. But in prestige, the chairman of the board, who in most cases is not an officer of the bank, later, just to have tighter authority, when I put the investment group together, I would be president, chief executive officer, and chairman of the board. I would have all those titles.
yeah.
Uh,
So that wasn't
so
strange to have.
in prestige, you get greater publicity being chairman of the board.
Yeah.
But in the sense of authority and responsibility, the president and CEO is the senior man.
So when you were president, but you weren't chairman of the board, at those meetings, like you would be the one running it, and it would be kind of like what would be the dynamic like at the meetings?
Well, that's right. Because although the chairman of the board had greater prestige, he didn't have knowledge. He didn't know what to talk about. He couldn't talk to the board. He couldn't answer questions. So he would usually open the meeting. When I was totally in charge, I would start my board meetings with a pledge to the flag. We had a big giant flag in the boardroom,
Yeah.
which was a very sacred place. No one went in that room unless you were a senior board member. Now, as a student at U of H, they gave me a key to the bank, and when the bank was closed, I could go in that room. I studied there on Saturday and Sunday because there was no one in the bank.
Yeah.
And only the senior people knew I was in there, and I had a key.
And they let you go in there?
But the president, I conducted the board meetings at Heights, and so chairman of the board would usually just open the meeting, welcome everyone, say something,
Yeah.
welcoming and flattering, but then he would turn the meeting over to me, and I would call on someone to say the prayer. Sometimes I would say it, but not all the time. I wanted my board meeting members to feel a part of it all, so they would say the prayer, and then I would conduct the meeting.
So there were 25 board members,
Yes.
and you're considered one of them. So it's you were.
I was one of the 25, right.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So what when you were at the bank, what was the position that you held for the longest?
Well, We had Heights 5 years. We bought it, turned it around, and sold it in 5 years. So to start with, I was president and CEO, and the gentleman we've talked about in this picture, who was retired, was chairman of the board. Well, as time went along, he got tired of coming to the bank. He was a wealthy man. He'd spent lots of years in the bank, and so he just didn't want to come anymore. So, uh, because I had a voting trust on the bank by that time, uh, we didn't want to fool with anyone else, so the board just made me chairman also. So maybe I'm just pulling it out of the air, maybe 2 or 3 years after I had had the bank. See, again, the first bank, these are good lessons for you about business. You had to poor boy everything. I didn't have the money to buy a bunch of stock, so I had to have a carried interest. I got a position in the sale because I had found the bank, bought the bank, turned it around, and then sold it. So I got a carried position. Then, after you do your first deal, life gets simple then because we had a track record. Uh, the first investors had to go on my giving them a sales pitch. I can make you some money in 5 years. But after I did the first deal, then lots of people wanted to be in my group because we had a track record.
Yeah. So how long were you president for?
Well, at Heights, I went in as president, and so I was president for 5 years till we sold it. In the last 2 or 3 years, I was all those three titles. Then in the next banks that we bought, I went in as president, chairman of the board, and I formed a bank holding company so it could own multiple banks, and I was all three titles in the holding company. Now, when a holding company owned several banks, I needed a president in every bank. So I was all those titles, and the bank holding company was called Tex First Bank Shares. So I had all the titles up there, but I was no longer president in the bank. I might be, it depended on the circumstances. I might also be president till I find the right man. And then when I had the 15 banks, I had to have a president in every bank day in, day out, because I might only go in a bank one day a week
Yeah.
to approve big loans and help with business solicitation and that kind of
So
thing.
what was your title during that time? Like when you had
Well, okay. I was senior vice president of the holding company, and I was chief executive officer in the 15 banks. But I needed a local man. I needed a guy whose grandpappy had lived in that town. We'll take any city,
Yeah.
Gonzales. I needed a man who had lived in that city all his life, who knew everybody. So, in the main, I would just be chief executive officer, and I had the title of regional director. So I was the regional manager of all 15, but I had a local. Well, man, I say man, when I first started, I had 15 men who were presidents, but I started a deal where I would take a really bright woman who had been with the bank long, long years, and I would groom her and make her president. So 9 of my bank presidents were women.
Oh, really?
So
What year was that?
that was, well, let me think a minute. I retired in my late 50s. Uh, so, well, let me reverse it. I'll tell you, I've been talking so much, my brain's getting numb.
Yeah.
I've been retired 28 years. So, this is 24. So what would that have been? 90 something, 1990 something,
Okay.
when I would have been in my late 50s.
And so at that time, it wasn't like weird to have women like because how that's actually a great question. How have like has the workplace how did the workplace change like when it came to like gender and stuff
Well,
as you got older?
yeah, great question. It has massively changed. It was just unthinkable to have a woman as president of a bank, even to have one as an officer.
Yeah.
Very few women were even officers, and if they were officers, it was mainly in the back room somewhere. They wouldn't be loan officers. While I was still in Houston, at Houston National, ultimately I made my secretary a loan officer. So she was assistant cashier and loan officer, and I think there were only two loan officers in Houston that were women. My bank had one, and the old Texas National had an installment loan officer named Lita Dubose, who was really a very attractive woman and been in banking all her life,
Yeah.
very sophisticated, and she was an installment loan officer. She could make car loans, boat loans, and home improvement loans,
Yeah.
but but she couldn't make commercial loans.
Was that because she was a woman?
Yeah, yeah.
And
There was great prejudice against everybody back then,
yeah. And
especially women. So when I made all these women president, I was popular in the women community.
yeah.
When I retired, I think every employee in Schulenburg was a woman.
Really?
The president was a woman. Everybody was a lady. So at my retirement party, they brought a jug this tall of jelly beans. And you could punch a button and it would spew out jelly beans out of a spout.
Yeah.
And they lasted forever. I couldn't begin to think how many jelly beans are in a jug this wide and this long. And so the note said, to Mr. Saunders, from his sweet girls at Schulenburg. And I still have that in a file. It was a funny note for them to write.
So like that's actually a great kind of segue into just kind of just like how the bank was in general. Like, so there wasn't a lot of women, right? So
Well, there were a lot of women employed.
well, I mean, like there weren't a lot of women like in high
no
position.
officers.
So how did that slowly change? Like, were you like, because at first it was taboo. Like, when did it become more accepted to like promote? And like, how did that develop?
Son, I am really being immodest, and I confess that. I am being immodest. But we talked in a prior podcast about prejudice against minority groups.
Yeah.
Well, your grandmother and I really were pace setters. I don't know if you've heard that old country song that says, I was country when it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Well, today it is cool to be non-prejudiced.
Yeah.
To say I am not prejudiced. That's very popular and very cool today. But grandmother and I were not prejudiced when it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And we really were pace setters. I was the first one to have 9 women presidents. Even as a younger man, I was probably the second officer in Houston to make a woman an officer.
Did people talk to you about that? Were they like
talked all the time.
they were like, why did you do that? Like,
Well,
or
and I told you before about my experience in the Navy,
Yeah.
being non-prejudiced, dishal, and I told you about being the first teacher of people of African American descent.
yeah.
And we did it because we were Christian. It was right, and it was wrong to have prejudice.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't have prejudice. I mean, every live person was a child of God. So I'm not being modest, and I confess that.
Yeah.
I should not even tell you all this, but I ought to have more humility.
Well, no, it's
But it
fascinating.
was a fact. I had women presidents when nobody, and to have 9 of 15 women really made me popular in the women's crowd.
What did any minorities that like work at the banks? Like, how did that like when you first started working there? I assume it was like all white. Like, did it change as you were working
Well,
there?
I'm trying to think a minute, son. All right. For long, long years, I've told you before, I didn't even know a person of African descent.
Yeah.
My first one was a high school boy working for Hinkies. Well, when I was president of Northwest Bank and Trust, I had left Houston National, and it was my second group together.
Yeah.
After Houston National came the group for Heights State Bank, which is a well-known bank, well known. Then the next was the bank holding company on Northwest Bank and Trust and Industrial Bank. So when I was president of Northwest, a friend of mine from the old Houston National days called me and he said, Roy, his name was Stuart Aaron. He was a Jewish friend of mine. Stuart called me and he said he was a senior loan officer at Houston National, and I was president at Northwest and chairman president of the holding company. So Stuart called me and he said, Roy, we have a fine young African American man at the bank, a young man. He's a college graduate. We had him in our credit department. He's a good credit analyst. The bank is going to cut back on staff and he's going to be fired. He said, do you have any place you could use him? And I said, well, Stuart, let me try to find a place. I said, I really like the idea. There is no black person in my bank. I don't know an African American person who's in a bank,
Yeah.
but I would like to hire him. But I said, let me think about it. I don't have a place, but let me call you back in a few days and let me see what I can think of. So his name was Ricky. And so I had Ricky come out and interview with me. And he and I became friends almost immediately. It was sort of funny. He'd tell a joke about me because once the bank closed, I took my coat off. And I was very particular about my clothes. I didn't want to mess up my tie. So I would fold my arms and put my tie outside. And he thought that was so funny. And he always kidded me about it. We were friends.
Yeah.
I was his employer, ultimately. But he teased me about the way I kept my tie.
Yeah.
Years later, when we were both gone from that bank, he called me at home. I was retired. And he said, Mr. Saunders, the thing I remember about you is how your tie was always outside your folded arms. But anyway, to make money and sell the banks, we had to be highly profitable. So I kept the employee level at the lowest possible level. And I didn't have a single employee that was more than I desperately needed.
Yeah.
And I worked them hard, but I paid them well.
What did you hire him for?
Well, any position. Oh, the African American young man. Well, it ultimately worked out that I did not have a position for him, but if I didn't hire him, he would wind up going to some other city doing something other than banking, and I would lose the chance. So I offered a part-time job to him. He started working in our credit department as a part-time credit analyst. And I told him, Ricky, as soon as I can, I'll hire you full-time. I can't do it now because I preach economy to every staff member. They work hard, they work overtime, and I can't just hire a person because I like them. but as soon as I can, I'll make you full time. And we did. He came as a part time credit analyst in the credit department, and he was a good analyst. He did a good job. And ultimately, my credit manager left to be a country banker. He moved to Austin, suburb of Austin, in a country bank. So I had an opening. So I made Ricky full time, and he was a credit analyst. But ultimately, uh, we sold that bank. I transferred him to Industrial Bank
Yeah.
as a credit analyst. Then we sold that bank, and the people who bought it didn't keep him. And so he went out to California, and he was a loan broker. Got out of banking, and he was a loan broker because he understood banking. And he would, people who needed a loan at a bank would come to him, and he would find a bank for them. And that's where he called me from, California.
Yeah.
So that was the deal on minorities.
So was he like one of the only minorities that you hired?
Well, I'm trying to think.
And yeah.
Let me think about it a second, because there were lots of banks and lots of years. Okay, I had Ricky during the Texas First Bank years. All right, then I went to the country. I don't right offhand think of. We had some Hispanic ladies who
Yeah.
were bookkeepers and secretaries and fine employees. Son, I do not think of any other uh, non-Hispanic minority group.
So it was white and Hispanic people working.
White and
mostly?
Hispanic, I
Yeah.
don't recall any Asians
Yeah.
or any other minority group. And really, I've tried to explain this in prior tapes, but they weren't available to me. I didn't know any.
Yeah.
And
Because
no one applied for a job.
Yeah.
Ricky was the only one who applied. And at that time, I can think of two men of African American descent that was in all of Houston banking. Ultimately, there became an African American bank that was subsidized by all the other banks. We wanted there to be a bank, but as I told you, I taught the first group of their employees in the American Institute of Banking program at night. So that was sort of the deal. It was just a different world,
Yeah.
son. Just a different world. Well, okay, I do find one exception. Okay, I'll tell you this. Before I bought the first banks, in my last years downtown, I was a senior vice president, and I was over all the loan officers, and an older man called me and said, I know one of your jobs is being over all the secretaries, and monthly I would have a secretarial meeting and give them pep talks and teach them how to cross sell. And so he said, there is an African American young woman who is highly intelligent. She's got a master's degree. She's really bright, and I would love to hire her into the bank. Would you take her as an apprentice secretary? She would be the assistant to your secretary. You would have two secretaries, and you would teach her how to be a senior secretary. And I said, well, sure, love to. And so she came. So I hired two. I had forgotten about her.
Yeah.
But sadly, she and I got along famously. She was doing well in the bank. She was making progress. Everything you ever wanted. She was with me about a year, and NASA hired her.
Really?
Because she was fantastic in mathematics.
Yeah.
She had a master's in mathematics. And NASA paid her more than twice what I was paying her, and gave her benefits. And we were friends, and she said, Mr. Saunders, sorry, but I got to go.
Yeah.
You can't pay me double the amount, or you'd be in trouble with all the women of the bank.
Yeah.
So she left me. I didn't fire her. She quit. It made double pay plus benefits.
Well, that's a cool story.
So those are the only two I remember.
So when you were hiring them, or just women, or just non-white men, was there ever a board member or like someone at the bank who was like, who like said something to you about it, like, why are you doing that? Like, was there any like weird comments that anyone made, like?
Well, not really, because when I put the group together, after the first group, then they were seeking me out. The first group I was seeking out and going to directors who had known me for years, and when I was not even a director. And so I had to sell them. It was a sales job. I can make you some money. But after that, I interviewed them, and I had rules to come into my group. You would not come to me wanting to sell your stock within 5 years. Don't invest with me if you can't leave that money for 5 years. And you confess the first day, I am the boss. I don't have time to answer to 25 men and explain everything I'm doing to 25 men. If I don't have the authority, I can't get the job done.
Yeah.
So who I hired, the only time I had two times I had a question. This is sort of interesting. I'll be quick. I hired my nephew. I told you before, I believe, that I hired Brooks McGee, a CPA, Baylor graduate, who was my nephew. Well, one of the officers said, Mr. Saunders, that's nepotism. And I said, well, I don't know what it is, but I don't know anybody in town who's a CPA as bright as my nephew who will come to work for me. If you can find one that's as good as he is, as bright as he is, you refer him to me and I'll hire him. So he apologized and said it wasn't his business, and my nephew worked for me till I sold the last Houston bank. And the other was, my best buddy in life was Roy Eckert since the second grade. His daughter, Valerie, was a Baylor graduate, and I hired her. And so when I hired her, the same director had the same comment, nepotism. And I told him again, I hire who I want to hire. We've gone through this before. But I said, as long as you're talking about it, I hired a director's daughter, Melanie, who would have been called nepotism because she was. But anyway, those are the only two questions I ever had. I hired my best friend's daughter and my nephew, and we made short work of that. So they never gave him a problem because they wanted in the group, and to get in the group, they were not going to harass me about daily decisions.
Yeah.
The rule was, if the bank's making money and making progress, I'll give you a report in the director's meeting, and that's all you need to know.
Yeah. This is off topic, but what did your friend Roy, what was his career?
Roy was a fascinating guy. He didn't like school, and he was very intelligent, very brilliant, but he had trouble with mathematics, and he may have flunked Algebra 1. He didn't do well in it for sure.
Yeah.
And he advised me not to take algebra because he was half semester ahead of me. And I told him, Roy, I've got to take algebra. I'm going to college and I got to have it. So anyway, at first he didn't go to college. He graduated from Jeff Davis High School, and I went to a different high school, Austin. We were still buddies and did things together. So when he got out of high school, he took an entry-level job with a company called Thornhill Craver. And he was as low in the company as you get. But he worked hard. Uh, he got to the bank early, early in the morning. He didn't need much sleep. And he would be at his desk at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Goodness.
They gave him a key so he could get in. And he just got promotion after promotion.
So what would he actually do?
Well, ultimately, he was executive vice president of Thornhill Craver, and the president was the retired owner who didn't even come to the company.
What was the company? Like, what was the...
Well, it made valve actuators in the industry, valves and valve actuators are big, big products. So it was a manufacturer. They had a fabricating shop, and then they had a sales force. And Roy was over the whole deal, and he started at the very, very bottom. And by the time he died, he's been dead a couple of years. A great tragedy. He was a very wealthy man. He bought a couple of farms at rock bottom price, and over the long, long years, he used them for family and entertainment, and the going price on those farms was $20,000 an acre. Didn't even include the houses he had built on them.
Yeah.
So that was his career. He took a few U of H courses at night so he could be with me. We took these courses together. We took them at the downtown school. In those years, you could go to any branch, any school, downtown, and you got credit at the main campus. So we took personal finance and some other classes together. Separate from me, he took accounting, and he met his future wife, Jean, in an accounting class. But basically, he had no degrees and essentially just some odds and ends of night school college.
Yeah.
But he made fabulous success because he was smart and he was just a hard worker, and he invested well. He bought those farms, and he was a big investor in American funds, mutual funds. He started a Roth IRA, and he, just over 40 years, he just invested every month. So that was his career.
Well, that's great. Well, I think we'll wrap it up for today. And next time we'll talk about your late career, and then when you, I don't know what, and beyond after that. So
well, I've been so wordy. I didn't know there was going to be another session. I thought 4 was going to be it. But
no, I think one more, because I want to hear about your later life as well, and when you had grandchildren as well. I think that's
my favorite time of life, and if you can stand it, I'll be delighted.
Yeah. Well.
Okay. Thank you, son.
No problem.